The cantina on orbital station Vera 7 was packed with creatures from 100 different worlds. And the air smelled like smoke and strange spices, and the sweat of species that should never have met in the same room. But tonight, every eye and sensor and antenna was focused on one table in the center, where Crix Vaughn held court like a king among peasants. Crix was the Zari noble, standing nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms that moved like dancers and shimmered between purple and gold, depending on the light. His compound eyes reflected the faces of his admirers as he lifted a drink with one hand and gestured dramatically with the other. 3. You should have seen it, he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room with practiced ease. The Mordexian stalker was twice my size with claws that could cut through ship armor, and it thought it was the hunter. The crowd laughed and gasped at all the right moments because they knew what was expected of them. Crix Vaughn was rich and powerful, and his family controlled half the mining operations in this sector. So when he told stories, you listened and you applauded. Behind him on the wall hung his trophies, preserved and mounted for all to see. The massive fangs of the Mordexian stalker he was describing. The skull plate of a Kethrani war beast with horns as long as a human arm. The preserved stinger of something that looked like a nightmare-made flesh. Each one represented a hunt on a classified death world. And each one had cost more credits than most species would see in a lifetime. The trick, Crix continued, clicking his mandibles in what passed for a smile among his kind, is to never let them know you are there until it is too late. I tracked that beast for 6 hours through jungle, so thick my sensors could barely penetrate it. And when I finally had the shot, he mimed pulling a trigger with one of his upper hands. One perfect blast right through its central nerve cluster. It was dead before it hit the ground. More applause, more raised glasses, more admiring looks from the young Dasari females in the corner, who found his wealth and status very attractive indeed. Crix loved this part. The hunting itself was exciting in its own way. But this was what he truly lived for: the attention, the respect, the fear in the eyes of lesser species when they realized they were standing next to someone who had killed creatures that would tear them apart without a second thought. Tell us about the Vorthen spider, someone called out. And Crix's mandibles clicked faster with pleasure because that was his favorite story. The Vorthen ambush spider, he said, settling back in his chair as servants refilled his drink. Now that was a magnificent creature. 8 legs, each one tipped with a claw that secreted paralytic venom, and a body covered in sensory hairs that could detect movement from 50 meters away. They say no prey has ever escaped a Vorthen spider once it begins its hunt. He paused for dramatic effect. They were wrong. The crowd leaned in. Hungry for the rest, I found her nest, Crix said, lowering his voice so everyone had to strain to hear. Deep in a cave system on Vorthen 3. She was pregnant, her egg sac already swelling with the next generation of perfect killers. Most hunters would have waited for her to leave, to take the shot from safety. But I wanted to see her eyes when she realized what was happening. In the corner of the cantina, far from the crowd and the lights and the admiration, a figure sat alone in a shadowed booth. She was small by galactic standards, barely 5.5 feet tall, with soft brown skin and dark hair pulled back from her face. She wore the practical clothing of a spacer, nothing fancy, nothing that drew attention, and she was nursing a drink that she had been making last for over an hour. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and she was a xenobiologist from a planet that nobody in this cantina had ever heard of. Her transport had been delayed by 3 days due to a fuel shortage, leaving her stranded on this station with nothing to do but wait and listen to this insectoid aristocrat brag about killing pregnant animals. I walked right up to her, Crix was saying, his voice rising with excitement, and she saw me. Oh yes, she saw me. Her legs tensed and her fangs dripped venom, and for one beautiful moment we looked at each other, predator to predator, and then I fired. She was dead before she could even react. And her eggs, well, he made a dismissive gesture. I left those for the scavengers. The crowd erupted in cheers and Crix basked in their admiration like a lizard in the sun. Elena set down her drink. The sound was not loud, but something about it cut through the noise of the cantina. Maybe it was the way her jaw tightened or the way her eyes fixed on Crix with an expression that several nearby patrons found deeply unsettling without understanding why she snorted. It was not a polite sound. It was the sound of someone who had heard enough and could not keep quiet anymore. And in the sudden silence that followed, it seemed very loud indeed. Crix turned, his compound eyes scanning the room until they found the source of the interruption. He saw a small, soft-looking creature sitting alone, and his mandibles clicked with amusement rather than anger because she looked about as threatening as a newborn grub. "You," he said, pointing with one of his lower arms. "Do you have something to add to my story, little one?" Elena looked up and met his gaze. Her eyes were brown, simple, forward-facing eyes with no special adaptations that Crix could see. And yet something about the way she looked at him made his chitin feel tight. "Did any of them chase you back?" She asked. Her voice was calm, almost casual, like she was asking about the weather. Crix laughed, and his admirers laughed with him, though a few of them noticed that the laughter sounded slightly forced. "Chase me back?" he repeated. "Why would they chase me back? I am a hunter, not prey. I use long-range neural disruptors, anti-predator fields, orbital targeting support. I hunt smart, little creature. That is why I'm still alive and my trophies are on that wall." Elena nodded slowly, and that thin smile appeared on her face again, the one that made the Velthary merchant 2 tables over suddenly decide he needed to visit the restroom. "So," she said, "you have never actually been hunted?" "Of course not," Crix said, spreading all 4 arms wide. "That would be suicide. The creatures I hunt are Deathworld apex predators, the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. No sane person would face them without proper precautions." "Interesting," Elena said, and something in her tone made Crix's antennae twitch with an emotion he did not recognize. "I was just curious." She went back to her drink, seemingly done with the conversation. But Crix found that the mood in the room had shifted. His admirers were still there, still smiling, but the energy had changed somehow. "Wait," he said, moving toward her table with 2 of his guards following close behind. "What world are you from, little creature? I do not recognize your species." Elena looked up again, and this time her smile showed teeth flat. Blunt teeth that should not have been threatening at all, but somehow were. "Earth," she said. "My world is called Earth." Crix searched his memory and found nothing. He looked at his guards and they shrugged their upper shoulders. He looked at the crowd and saw only confused faces. Nobody in the cantina had ever heard of Earth. As Crix stared at this small, soft creature with her forward-facing eyes and her unsettling smile, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Curiosity mixed with something else. Something that felt almost like the beginning of fear. "Earth," he repeated. "I will remember that name." Elena raised her glass in a small toast. "You probably should," she said. And then she finished her drink and walked out of the cantina without looking back, leaving Crix Vaughn standing in the middle of the room with questions he could not answer and a feeling in his thorax that would not go away. Crix Vaughn could not sleep that night, and it made him furious because the sorry nobles did not lose sleep over the words of some unknown creature from an unregistered world. Yet every time he closed his compound eyes, he saw her face again, that small, soft face with its unsettling smile and its simple brown eyes that looked at him like he was something less than what he knew himself to be by the 3rd hour of restlessness. He gave up on sleep and activated his personal research terminal. If this Earth creature wanted to play games with him, he would learn everything there was to know about her pathetic little world, and then he would show her exactly why Crix Von was feared across 12 systems. The first search results made him pause. Earth was not just registered in the galactic databases, it was classified. The file carried warning tags that Crix had only seen on the most dangerous death worlds in known space. And as he read further, his mandibles began to click in a rhythm that meant anxiety among his people. Class 12 Death World. Words glowed on his screen like an accusation. Crix had hunted on Class 8 worlds and considered himself brave for doing so. But Class 12 was something else entirely. Class 12 meant that the planet itself was actively trying to kill everything on it at all times. He read on with growing unease. The planet had an axial tilt of over 23 degrees, which meant its seasons shifted dramatically throughout its orbit. Creatures that lived there had to adapt to freezing cold and burning heat sometimes within the same year. The atmosphere contained 21% oxygen, a concentration so high that fires could start from almost nothing and spread faster than most species could run. But it was the section on native fauna that made Crix's Chitingo pale humans, the file said, were persistent predators. They did not have claws or fangs or venom or armor. They were not particularly fast or strong compared to other Deathworld species. Their senses were mediocre at best, but they had one adaptation that made them unlike anything else in the galaxy. They did not stop. The file described something called persistence hunting, and Crix read the words 3 times because he was certain he must be misunderstanding. Humans would select prey and then follow it, not chase it, not sprint after it, just follow at a steady pace that they could maintain for hours. Their bodies could regulate heat through something called sweating, which allowed them to keep moving long after other creatures collapsed from exhaustion. They would walk and jog and walk some more, watching their prey flee in panic again and again until it could not flee anymore, until its heart gave out or its legs failed or its mind simply broke from the terror of being followed by something that never ever stopped. And they did this for fun. The file contained a note from a galactic survey scout who had observed humans on their homeworld, and the scout's words carried a tone of barely controlled horror. They call it marathon running. They gather in groups of thousands and run for over 40 kilometers without rest. They do this recreationally. They give each other medals for it. I recommend extreme caution when dealing with this species. Crix closed the file and sat in the dark for a long time. His advisors found him the next morning and immediately saw that something was wrong. When he told them about the human and her question, they exchanged nervous glances and urged him to forget the whole thing. There was no shame in walking away from a confrontation with a Class 12 Deathworlder, they said. In fact, it was the smart thing to do, but Crix Von had never been smart. When his pride was involved, he found Elena in the station's observation deck, watching ships come and go through the massive windows. She turned when she heard him approach, and that same small smile appeared on her face like she had been expecting him. "You researched my world," she said. "It was not a question. I did," Crix replied, forcing his voice to stay steady. "And I'm not impressed. Your species has no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. You are soft and slow and fragile. And the only reason you survived your death world is because you learned to make tools to compensate for your weaknesses." Elena tilted her head slightly, watching him with those simple brown eyes. "Is that what you think?" "That is what I know," Crix said, clicking his mandibles aggressively. "You mocked my hunts last night, but I have killed creatures far more dangerous than any human. You survived through technology and tricks, nothing more. Then prove it." Elena said. The words hung in the air between them, and Crix felt his heart beating faster. "What did you say?" "You keep telling everyone how great a hunter you are," Elena said, her voice still calm and casual. "So prove it. Hunt me." Crix stared at her, trying to determine if she was joking. She did not appear to be joking. "I am proposing a gentleman's hunt," Elena continued. "You give me a head start, basic supplies, and then you track me. If you catch me within 3 standard days, I will admit publicly that humans are nothing special and that Crix Vaughn is the greatest hunter in the sector. I will bow and scrape and tell everyone how wrong I was to question you. And if I do not catch you, then you pay my transport fees and admit you were bested by a soft little human." Crix wanted to laugh, but something stopped him. The rational part of his mind was screaming warnings, reminding him of what he had read about persistence hunters and marathon running and creatures that did not stop. But his pride was louder, and his pride would not let him walk away from this challenge. "I accept," he said. "I will have my ship prepared for one condition," Elena interrupted, holding up a finger. "No orbital support. No I targeting assistance. No neural disruptors. Just you, your rifle, and your skills. If you want to prove you are a real hunter, then hunt me, like you hunted those creatures on your wall predator against prey." Crix hesitated, and Elena saw it. Her smile widened just slightly. "Unless you need your toys to catch one soft little human?" The insult burned, and Crix heard himself agreeing before his mind could catch up. He would hunt her with nothing but his natural abilities and his weapon. And he would prove once and for all that humans were nothing to fear. They shook on it, her small soft hand gripping his larger clawed one, and as they finalized the details, Crix noticed something strange. Elena's hand was warm, almost hot, like she was running a fever. But her face showed no sign of illness, and when he mentioned it, she just smiled that unsettling smile again. "Humans run hot," she said. "Our bodies are furnaces. It is how we keep going when other creatures have to stop." That night, as Crix prepared his hunting gear and selected the world where the hunt would take place, he told himself that he was not afraid. He told himself that Elena was just a small, soft creature playing mind games, and that when the hunt began, she would panic and run, and he would catch her within hours. He told himself many things that night, but somewhere deep in his thorax, in the part of his brain that his ancestors had used to avoid predators millions of years ago, a small voice whispered that he had just made a terrible mistake. He ignored it. That was his second mistake. The first was agreeing to the hunt at all. Veximire was beautiful in a savage way, with forests that stretched to every horizon and mountains that clawed at a purple sky. The air smelled clean and wild, and sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden beams that made the whole world look like something from a dream. Crix had chosen this moon specifically because he knew its terrain from previous hunts. The forests were thick enough to make tracking interesting, but not so dense that his sensors would be useless. There were rivers and valleys and clearings, all of which favored a hunter who knew how to use the land. Elena stood at the starting point with nothing but a small pack on her back, a knife on her belt, and a locator beacon that she could activate if she wanted to forfeit. She wore simple clothing in muted greens and browns, and her dark hair was tied back from her face. She looked tiny and fragile against the massive trees, like a child playing in a forest meant for giants. "You have 6 hours," Crix said, unable to keep the confidence out of his voice. "I suggest you use them wisely." Elena looked around at the forest with an expression that Crix could not read. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the alien air. And then she turned to him with that small smile. "See you soon," she said, and then she walked into the trees. Not ran, walked. Crix watched her go with his mandibles clicking in amusement. She was not even trying to create distance, just strolling into the forest like she was on a nature hike. Perhaps she had already accepted that she would lose and was simply going through the motions. He spent the 6 hours preparing his gear and reviewing his strategy. He would move fast and hard, using his superior speed and senses to close the gap within hours. By nightfall, he expected to have her cornered, and by morning, The whole embarrassing incident would be over when the timer finally reached 0. Crix activated his tracking suite and set off into the forest. Her trail was laughably easy to follow. She had made no effort to hide her footprints or mask her scent, and Crix found himself moving at nearly full speed through the undergrowth. His forelegs carried him smoothly over roots and rocks, and his compound eyes caught every broken twig and disturbed leaf. By midday, he was certain he was gaining on her. His tracker showed her moving at a slow, steady pace, roughly 5 kilometers ahead. And at his current speed, he would catch her before sunset. He pushed harder, his powerful legs eating up the distance. The first strange thing happened around the 14th. Horcrux had been moving continuously since the hunt began, and his body was starting to send him warning signals. The Sari were built for bursts of speed and power, not sustained effort, and his joints were beginning to ache in ways that concerned him. But he ignored the discomfort because he was so close now, less than 3 kilometers behind her. Then his tracking suite showed something that made him stop. Her trail was not going straight anymore. It looped back on itself, crossed over old paths, led to dead ends, and then doubled back. It was not the pattern of a panicking prey animal. It was something else entirely. She was mapping the terrain. Crix realized with a chill that ran through his thorax that Elena had not been fleeing at all. She had spent the entire day walking calmly through the forest, learning its paths and landmarks. While he had been burning through his energy reserves, trying to catch her, he forced himself to keep moving. But the easy confidence from the morning was gone. Night fell, and Crix faced a choice. His species needed rest every 10 hours, or their bodies would start to shut down, but Elena was still moving. His tracker showed her steady pace continuing through the darkness, not slowing, not stopping, just walking endlessly through the forest like a machine that did not know how to quit. He tried to keep going, pushing through the exhaustion, but his legs began to tremble and his vision started to blur. Finally, with a curse in his native language, he was forced to stop and rest. He found a sheltered spot beneath a rocky overhang and collapsed against the stone, his chitin scraping against the surface as his body finally gave in to its demands. He set an alarm to wake him in 3 hours, less than half the rest he needed, but he could not afford to let her get too far ahead. When the alarm pulled him from sleep, he felt worse than before. His joints screamed in protest as he forced himself to stand, and his compound eyes took long seconds to focus properly. But he checked his tracker and saw that Elena had stopped too. She had made camp less than 2 kilometers. Away hope flared in his chest. She was resting, which meant he could close the gap while she slept. He stumbled forward through the pre-dawn darkness, pushing his aching body toward her position. He found her campsite just as the sun began to rise. It was empty. The fire she had built was cold, the ashes scattered. She had left hours ago, long before he arrived. But what made Crix stare in disbelief was what she had left behind. Message, scratched into the dirt with a stick. Slept 4 hours. Plenty of time. See you tomorrow. She was mocking him. Crix stood over that message for a long moment, his mandibles clicking in a pattern that meant rage and frustration, and something that might have been fear. She had rested for 4 hours and then started walking again. She was moving slowly, making no effort to hide. And yet he could not catch her. He activated his biomonitor and saw the warnings flashing across his vision. Fatigue toxins building in his muscles. Stress hormones flooding his system, efficiency dropping with every hour. His body was breaking down from the sustained effort. And they were only on day 2. Elena, according to his tracker, was already 3 kilometers ahead and moving steadily. He started walking. By midday his legs felt like they were filled with sand and broken glass. By evening he could barely see straight. But he kept moving because the alternative was admitting that this soft little human was beating him. Without even trying, night fell again. And Elena did not stop. She just kept walking, her pace never changing, her direction always purposeful. Crix's tracker showed her moving through the forest like a ghost, and no matter how hard he pushed, he could not close the distance. He collapsed again near midnight, unable to go any further. His body was shutting down whether he wanted it to or not. And as darkness took him, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Footsteps slow. Steady footsteps, somewhere in the darkness nearby. He tried to move. Tried to raise his weapon, but his arms would not respond. He lay there in the dirt, helpless, listening to those footsteps circle his position. They did not come closer, did not attack, just circled and circled like a predator examining its prey. Then they stopped. And the forest was silent when Crix woke at dawn. He found another message scratched in the dirt beside him. You should drink more water. Dehydration makes the exhaustion worse. She had found him in the darkness. She had stood over him while he slept. She could have done anything to him, and instead she had given him advice. Crix read that message over and over, and for the first time since the hunt began, he truly understood what he was facing. This was not a hunt anymore. It had never been a hunt. He was the prey, and Elena was simply waiting for him to realize. I checked his biomonitor and saw that he had less than 18 hours before his body would shut down completely without proper rest. Elena, meanwhile, was already 5 kilometers ahead. Still walking, still not running, still moving at that same steady pace that she could maintain forever. Day 3 had begun. And Crix Von finally admitted to himself that he was not going to win this hunt, but his pride would not let him quit. Not yet. The sun of Vexa Minor rose on the 3rd day and found Crix Von in ruins. His beautiful iridescent chitin had gone dull and gray from exhaustion, and his 4 arms hung limp at his sides like dead branches. Every step sent pain shooting through his joints, and his compound eyes could barely focus on the trail ahead, but he kept moving because stopping meant losing. And Crix Von did not lose his tracker, showed Elena less than 2 kilometers ahead, and some desperate part of his mind whispered that he could still catch her. If he pushed hard enough, if he ignored the screaming of his muscles and the warnings flashing across his biomonitor, he could close that distance before his body gave out entirely. The forest seemed to mock him as he stumbled through it. Birds called in the canopy above, and small creatures rustled in the undergrowth. And all of them sounded like they were laughing at the great hunter, brought low by a creature half his size with no claws and no fangs and no armor. He fell twice in the first hour, his legs simply refusing to hold him. Each time he forced himself back up, using tree trunks as supports, dragging himself forward through sheer force of will. His hunting rifle felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. But he would not drop it, could not drop it, because it was the only thing that made him a hunter instead of prey. The tracker beeped, and Crix's heart lurched. She was close, less than 500 meters now, and she had stopped moving. She had finally stopped. He pushed through a dense wall of undergrowth, branches scraping against his dulled chitin, and burst into a small clearing filled with morning sunlight. Elena was sitting on a large rock in the center of the clearing, her legs crossed and her hands resting on her knees. She looked up when he appeared, and that small smile spread across her face like she had been expecting him all along. She was not breathing hard. She did not look tired at all. Crix raised his rifle with arms that shook so badly he could barely aim, and he pointed it at her chest. The weapon's targeting system tried to lock on, but his trembling made it impossible to hold steady. "I found you," he gasped, his voice coming out as a wheeze. "I caught you." Elena did not move. She just sat there on her rock, watching him with those simple brown eyes. "Did you?" The question hung in the air, and Crix felt a cold sensation spreading through his thorax. She was not afraid. She was not running. She was sitting there like she was the one in control, and some ancient part of his brain was screaming at him that something was very wrong. "Get up," he commanded, trying to sound authoritative, Even though his voice cracked, "You lost. Admit it." Elena tilted her head slightly. "I am not the one who can barely stand." Crix tried to reply, but his legs chose that moment to give out. He collapsed to his knees, the rifle dropping from his nerveless fingers. And he knelt there in the dirt, gasping for air like a fish pulled from water. Elena stood slowly and stepped down from the rock. She walked toward him. It was the same walk she had used for 3 days slow. Steady, unhurried, and Crix suddenly understood on a primal level what it must feel like to be prey. She was not rushing because she did not need to rush. She knew he had nothing left, knew that all she had to do was keep coming and he would break. He scrambled for his rifle, but his arms would not cooperate. His claws scraped uselessly against the ground as Elena drew closer, her footsteps soft on the forest floor. "Stay back," he hissed, but there was no authority in it anymore. Only fear. Elena stopped a few feet away and crouched down so that her face was level with his. "Your problem, Crix, is that you have only ever hunted things that wanted to escape." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, like she was explaining something to a child. "You have never met something that was built to follow." Crix stared at her, his mandibles clicking in a broken rhythm of terror and confusion. "We used to chase antelope across the savannah for 8 hours. Elena continued, "Not running, just following. We would jog after them at a pace we could maintain forever, and they would run and run and run until their hearts gave out from the stress. They would collapse from heat stroke while we barely broke a sweat." She leaned closer, and Crix saw something in her eyes that made his survival instincts scream. "We did this before we invented weapons, Crix. Before fire, before tools, before language. Our ancestors walked animals to death with nothing but their feet and their patience. We are persistent predators, and we have been hunting for 2 million years." Crix made a sound that might have been a whimper. "Your trophies on that wall," Elena said, gesturing vaguely toward the sky where the station orbited far above. "They were ambush predators and territorial defenders. They evolved to kill quickly or not at all, to sprint and pounce and then rest. They never faced something that would not stop, that would not rest, that would follow them to the edge of exhaustion and then keep following." She reached out and tapped his chitin gently, right above his central heart. "That is what humans are, Crix. We are the thing in the darkness that keeps coming. We are the nightmare that does not care how fast you run, because we know you cannot run forever. We are very, very good at one thing above all others." "What?" Crix whispered. Elena smiled, and it was not a cruel smile. It was almost sad. "Waiting." She stood up and walked over to where his rifle had fallen. She picked it up, ejected the power cell, and tossed the weapon into the underbrush. "Your locator beacon," she said. "Use it. Call for extraction. The hunt is over." Crix wanted to argue, wanted to salvage some shred of his dignity, but his hand was already moving toward the beacon on his belt. His body knew what his pride refused to accept. He was beaten. Had been beaten since the moment the hunt began, and staying out here any longer would kill him. He pressed the activation button, and a signal shot up toward the orbiting ship. Elena nodded and turned to walk away. But Crix found his voice one last time. "Why?" He called out, "Why did you not hurt me? You could have. I was helpless in the night when you found me. I am helpless now. Why show mercy?" Elena stopped and looked back over her shoulder. "Because you were never a threat," she said. "You were just loud." She started walking again, heading toward a secondary extraction point that she must have identified during her 3 days of mapping the terrain. "And Crix?" She called back without turning around. "You owe me transport fees." Crix Vaughn knelt in that clearing until his ship arrived to collect him. And he thought about everything he believed about himself and his place in the galaxy. He thought about his trophies and his hunts and all the creatures he had killed without ever facing any real danger. He thought about a soft little human who had walked him into the ground without breaking a sweat, and for the first time in his life, the great hunter understood what it meant to be prey. The cantina on orbital station Vareth 7 was packed again 3 weeks later, but the crowd was not gathered around Crix Vaughn. The great hunter sat alone in a corner booth, his chitin still dull from his recovery. His compound eyes fixed on a drink he had not touched in over an hour. The crowd was gathered around. Merchant from the outer systems who was telling a story. He had heard from a friend who had heard it from a cargo pilot who had been on the station when it happened, and she just walked. The merchant was saying, his tentacles waving with excitement. For 3 days she just walked through that forest while the Dasari noble exhausted himself trying to catch her. She never ran, never hid, never even tried to create distance. She just kept moving at the same steady pace until he collapsed. The audience murmured with amazement and fear. And someone asked the question that everyone was thinking. What species was she? Human, the merchant said, lowering his voice like he was sharing a dangerous secret. From a Class 12 death world called Earth. Apparently, they evolved as persistence predators. They hunt by following prey until it dies from exhaustion. They can walk for days without stopping. The murmurs grew louder. And Crix, several patrons pulling out their datapads to research this species they had never heard of. Within minutes, the cantina was full of shocked gasps and nervous clicking and the sound of drinks being ordered by creatures who suddenly needed something strong. The story had spread across the station like fire through dry grass. And from the station it had spread to ships and other stations and distant worlds. Everywhere the story went, people started researching Earth and its strange soft predators. And everywhere they researched, they found the same terrifying information. Humans sweated to regulate their body temperature, allowing them to keep moving in conditions that would cause other species to overheat and die. They had forward-facing eyes designed for tracking prey across long distances. They formed social bonds that allowed them to hunt in coordinated packs. They domesticated wolves, actual wolves, by being so persistent that the wolves eventually gave up and joined them. The more the galaxy learned about humans, the more the galaxy became afraid. Elena Vasquez knew none of this as she sat in the transport terminal waiting for her ship. Her delay had finally ended, and she was looking forward to getting back to her research station on a quiet moon where nobody knew her name or cared about her species. She was reviewing her notes on Velthari mating rituals when a shadow fell across her datapad. She looked up to find Crix Vaughn standing before her. Looked different than he had in the cantina or on Vexa Minor. The arrogance was gone from his posture, and his mandibles were still instead of clicking with self-importance. He looked smaller somehow, like something inside him had been broken and rebuilt in a different shape. "May I sit?" he asked. Elena studied him for a moment, and then nodded toward the empty seat beside her. Crix settled into the chair awkwardly, his forearms folding and unfolding like he did not know what to do with them. "I transferred the transport fees to your account this morning," he said, "plus a bonus for medical expenses in case you needed anything." "I noticed," Elena said. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment while travelers bustled past them and announcements echoed through the terminal. "Why did you not hurt me?" Crix asked finally, and Elena could tell this question had been eating at him since the hunt ended. "You had every opportunity. I was helpless multiple times. You could have taken your revenge for every insult I threw at you in that cantina, and no one would have blamed you." Elena set down her datapad and turned to face him fully. "Do you know what my job is, Crix?" He shook his head. "I am a xenobiologist," she said. "I study alien life forms. I observe them and learn about them and try to understand how they fit into the ecosystems of their worlds. I do not hunt them and I do not kill them unless I have absolutely no other choice." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "When you challenged me to that hunt, you thought you were the predator and I was the prey. But that is not how I saw it. I saw a creature who had been taught all his life that strength comes from domination, and that respect comes from fear. And I saw a chance to teach him something different. Crix's mandibles clicked softly. What did you teach me? That there are many kinds of strength, Elena said, and that the strongest creature in the forest is not always the one with the biggest claws. Sometimes it is the one who can keep going when everyone else has stopped. Sometimes it is the one who chooses mercy when violence would be easier. She reached out and touched his arm gently. A gesture of connection that made Crix flinch slightly before he forced himself to relax. You are not a bad person, Crix. You are a product of your culture and your upbringing. You were taught to value the wrong things, but that does not mean you cannot learn to value different things. Crix was quiet for a long time after that. I retired from hunting, he said finally. I had my trophies removed from the cantina wall. I am donating my hunting equipment to a conservation group that protects endangered Deathworld species. Elena smiled a real smile this time. Warm and genuine. That is a good start. I want to understand, Crix said. And there was something almost desperate in his voice. I want to understand what makes humans the way you are. I have read the files and the reports, but they do not explain how a species so soft and fragile became so terrifying. Elena laughed, and the sound made several nearby travelers turn to look. We are not terrifying, Crix. We are just survivors. Our world tried to kill us every single day for millions of years, and we refused to die. We adapted and persisted and kept going no matter what, because giving up was never in our nature. She stood as her boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. If you really want to understand humans, do not read files and reports. Come visit Earth. See where we came from. Meet our families and eat our food and hear our stories. You will find that we are not monsters or nightmares. We are just people who learned a long time ago that the only way to survive is to never ever stop. Crix stood as well, and for a moment they faced each other, the former hunter and the human who had changed his entire understanding of the universe. Perhaps I will visit Earth someday, he said. I hope you do. Elena replied. Just be prepared to walk. We have a lot of ground to cover. She turned and headed for the boarding gate, and Crix watched her go until she disappeared into the crowd behind him. The cantina was still buzzing with stories about humans and persistence hunting and the soft little creature who had walked the sorry noble into the ground. The stories would keep spreading, and more species would learn about Earth and its strange, terrifying inhabitants. But Crix, Vaughn knew something that the stories would never capture. He knew that the most dangerous thing about humans was not their endurance, or their determination, or their refusal to give up. It was their capacity for mercy. It was the fact that Elena could have destroyed him physically, socially, emotionally, and instead she had chosen to teach him a lesson and then offer him a chance to become something better. That was what made humans truly terrifying. That was what made them truly wonderful. And as Crix walked out of the terminal into the artificial sunlight of the station, he made a silent promise to himself that he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of the mercy she had shown him somewhere in the galaxy. Elena Vasquez settled into her transport seat and pulled out her datapad to continue her research. She did not think about Crix Vaughn or the hunt or the stories spreading across known space. She had already moved on to the next challenge, the next discovery, the next step in her endless journey of learning and growing and exploring. That was what humans did. They kept moving forward, always.